Hi, everybody. I'm here in our worship space at Summerside Baptist Church again. I wanted to connect with you on our Monday. We had a great Easter Sunday service. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for those of you that hosted watch parties. It was a great day where we got to talk about the most important event in what we believe to be history, but the most important event in our history, and that is when Jesus rose from the dead. It means our lives have been changed. It means that our faith is real and living, that the Holy Spirit is powerful and has changed our lives. And I'm really glad that you got to share in that with us. I want to follow up a little bit on the resurrection with you because Paul talks about it quite a bit. There's a passage where he speaks almost entirely about the resurrection, and it may answer some of your questions in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And so he's asking basically, is there life after death? And here's what he says in beginning of verse 12. He says, "But tell me this, since we preach that Christ rose from the dead, why are some of you saying that there will be no resurrection of the dead?" So he's speaking to people who are skeptical and who are wondering, really, is there life after death? And they're doubting that. And I think that's kind of true. I think there are people that really have that question, especially today when death is kind of right in front of us. But every single one of us is going to have to face that question. Is there resurrection? Is there life after death? And, I wonder why somebody would think that there isn't a resurrection. And I think there are a number of reasons why, which I think we can all understand. Some people probably think that it isn't possible. It isn't scientifically possible, or it isn't in whatever their framework of what happens in the world is, that it's just not possible. It's impossible. It's unprovable, all of those things. There might be others that would say, oh, it's never been done. Nobody's ever come back from the dead to tell us. Now, of course, we who believe in Jesus kind of dispute that one for sure, but some people might believe that. A third thing would be a slightly more subtle move, but still has the same effect, that they would say the resurrection is just spiritual. It's something that happens in people's hearts. It's not our body. Paul would disagree. And then others might really shy away from a resurrection because that if there is a resurrection, then that creates a whole lot of questions that they don't want to unpack. If there's a resurrection, then what's next? And people would worry about, well, how would I figure out what's next? How could I be ready for what's next? Which we believe Jesus does make a difference in. Or some people might just try to buy into another religion, and they have another way of thinking about what's next. Maybe like reincarnation, or that somehow you start your life over again. For a lot of reasons, people might doubt that there really is a resurrection. So in 1 Corinthians 15, if you kept on reading, I think what you would see is that Paul kind of deconstructs like some of the pillars that might be underneath the doubts, and he tries to remove them so that we could freely believe in the resurrection. So the first pillar that he talks about is that if there is no resurrection, if people don't rise again from the dead, if there's no life after death, the first thing he says is this. He says, then Jesus' resurrection couldn't have happened. And so the implications of that is, are you really willing to take that risk, that all of the evidence, all of the witness to the resurrection of Jesus, that was all based on his whole life and ministry, all of his teaching, all of his love and miracles, that they didn't lead towards this resurrection that really happened? And the second reason Paul says that might be a pillar underneath your doubt might be, well, if it's true there is no resurrection, then that means that the faith of every believer who's ever lived is, well, basically useless. It's wrong. And so if you say that there's no resurrection, that you're basically saying that everyone who's believed has been fed a lie. They've been duped. And are you willing to take that risk? The third thing Paul talks about, that if the resurrection isn't true, then the earliest witnesses to it, the people that turned the world upside down, that the apostles were lying. So if there's no resurrection, then the apostles were lying. And Paul says, do you really want to stake your doubts on that the apostles were lying? And then the fourth pillar that Paul talks about as you read through up until verse 20 is this, that if there is no resurrection, if there's no life after death, and this really is the clincher, he saved the most important one to last, it's this, that are you willing to say that everyone who's died, everyone who's ever died, including your loved ones and everybody else's loved ones, is lost? Because if there is no life after death, then that's the implication. And so Paul uses this to say, really think long and hard about denying that there would be life after death, and really go on a search for how do you live forever? Because, if your conclusion is, oh yes, there's still no life after death after this, then faith is pitiful. But if you believe that there is resurrection and that Jesus was the first, that the rest of us can be next. And which do you choose? Well, I know what I choose. I don't want to live in a world where there's no resurrection, where there's no life after death, and I'm glad I don't have to. So in the end, I want to remind you, just as I have been with last week and this week, arguing doesn't work. It's your witness. It's your personal testimony about Jesus has changed your life. That's what matters these days. Your life reflecting Jesus. That's what matters. But I also want to say to you, the other thing that matters is that you are completely convicted, that you are totally convinced that resurrection is true and that Jesus' resurrection is your hope. So I want to encourage you with that today. Hopefully that's a little bit of encouragement to you just the day after Easter Sunday, that the resurrection really means everything. I hope not only do you believe it, but that you believe in Jesus and that he is the center of your life. So until next time, we'll see you later, and you take care out there. Bye-bye.